This is Woodside Church Sunday.
Good morning, everybody. What are you longing for? I mean, like really longing for. You know that thing that you just keep thinking about, like all week long, every day. You're thinking about, what's that thing you're longing for? You know, we have all kinds of things that we can end up longing for. We can think, if only I had this, or if only I could see that, or only if I could do this, if only I had that position, if only I got that big promotion, if only I were married, if only if I wasn't married, if... Yeah, they always say there's one thing worse than wishing you were married, and that's wishing that you weren't. You know, when you can get focused on something, you can think, if only I had a Tesla. Or maybe it's a position, if only I could be the worship leader. Never mind that you can't sing. We get focused on things and we think, if only that could be the case, then I would be fully content and satisfied with my life. And we're deceived. Because you know what? Whatever you accomplish, whatever you have, whatever position you have, whatever you get to see, it's never enough. You could be a billionaire and it's still never enough. Have you noticed that about them? They act like they had nothing. Like they are less content than the people who have nothing. That's a story. It's sort of like it's never enough. We're deceived. There's actually only one thing that will truly satisfy the deepest itch of your heart. And everything else is fake in that sense. Everything else is not real. And that's what we want to talk about, the one thing that will truly satisfy. So get out your Bibles or your devices with your Bibles on them. I had a wonderful little travel Bible I used to carry with me, which I really loved. But the print got too small as I got older. And now I have to have the Bible on my phone because I can control the font size. And I see some nodding heads from some other people who have found the same conundrum. It's either that or carry some monstrosity of a book in large print Bible. I'm not going to travel with that. So anyway, Psalm 63. And it's very important. A lot of times people don't pick this up. But Psalm 63 begins like this. It says, a psalm of David when he was in the desert of Judah. I think we might have a picture of the desert of Judah. Here it comes. Yeah. That's a picture of the desert of Judah, the actual real thing. And we know from reading the stories in the Bible, if you go back in the Bible to the stories of King David and his development, we know that he was in this wilderness because he was on the run from a king who was paranoid and who has begun to try to kill him, and he had to leave his position and leave his family, leave all that he knew, and basically with a few other outlaws live in the desert, running from place to place, sleeping and living in caves. This desert happens to have lots of caves in it, and they lived in a lot of caves, and it was 12 years. All right? So you have to have that context. Okay, so this man is in a tough spot. His circumstances are pretty bad and not comfortable at all. Life has been pretty unfair to him at this point in time. Not good at all. And in that context, he writes this psalm. Now I'll read it. You, God, are my God. Earnestly, I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you. In a dry and parched land where there's no water, I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory. Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you, and I will praise you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands, and I will be, what does it say? Fully satisfied. Catch that? Fully satisfied, as with the richest of foods. You know, we get, so Charles and I got, we had to introduce Charles to puddings and the various meanings of puddings and the various experiences of puddings. And of course, we get a lot of rich stuff. Cream, and more cream. With lots of sugar along the way. Rich food, it's very easy. You get to the point where I can't take any more. Right? That's what he's talking about. Fully satisfied, as with the richest of foods, with singing lips, my mouth will praise you. On my bed, I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night. Because you are my help, I sing in the shadow of your wings. I cling to you. Your right hand upholds me. Those who want to kill me will be destroyed. They will go down to the depths of the earth. They'll be given over to the sword and become food for jackals. But the king will rejoice in God, and all who swear by God will glory in him, while the mouths of liars will be silenced. So here he is, on the run, sleeping in caves, living in the desert, scraping together a living, not able to go home, away from his family, away from his wife, lost his former position, unjustly accused. And you'd expect him to be longing to get out of it. You'd expect him to be longing for water or food or at least a nice bed. But that's not what he's longing for. You'd expect him maybe to be longing for justice or revenge. That's not what he's longing for. You'd expect him maybe to be longing to get his position back or to go back home, longing for his family. That's not what he's longing for. We all find ourselves in wildernesses at some point in our life of various sorts. And mostly what do? We long to get out of it. Nobody wants to stay there very long. Get me out of this. I don't like this. This is not fun. But that's not him. There's not a single thing in here about get me out of this desert. Not one thing. Not a single thing. He's not even thinking about that. Why? Because something happened to him. Something happened to this man. Something strange and wonderful happened to him that has changed everything. That's changed his whole calculation about life and how to be satisfied. Something happened to him. It made his circumstances really kind of unimportant. It's almost like it doesn't matter to him anymore. Wilderness, not wilderness, whatever. Something happened to him. What happened to him? Well, he tells us in verse 2. I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory. You do not see the Lord in the sanctuary and behold his power and glory and walk away the same. If that happens to you, everything changes. Everything changes. And that's what happened. He's not talking about just some abstract idea, well, God's in glory. No. That's not what he's talking about. He's not even talking about a nice mental safe image in the back of your mind of the Lord. Well, I imagine the Lord like this. No. That is not what he's talking about. Like the prophet Isaiah, he's talking about actually seeing the Lord. And when Isaiah saw the Lord, he says, woe is me. He's completely undone. This is something that happens to you, and it's sort of like, it's like your guts are getting ripped out. It's overwhelming. It's life-changing. I've seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and glory. And you know what? He came away from that experience, first of all, knowing for sure who he was. It's very interesting at the end. He refers to himself as the king. He'd been anointed as king. He'd been chosen as king. But nobody had accepted him as king. He's not living like a king. He's living in caves. He's living like an imposter and a robber. He's living in caves. But he knows who he is. Because I think he heard it from the Lord. When he saw the Lord spoke to him. When he saw the Lord filled him, he says, with love. Your loving kindness. He's filled with love. When you see the Lord, there's almost a tangible, physical experience, a quality of his love. People describe it like a warm liquid thing that comes over you, and it's like, but it's on fire, and it envelops you and fills you with love that is beyond anything you've ever experienced. He came away from that experience filled with that love. He came away from that experience more alive than he'd ever been. He doesn't say this exactly, but a lot of other prophets and different people who this kind of thing, they describe it in terms of being more alive. And he does kind of almost get there. He says, your loving kindness is better than life. It's like you're more alive. It's like every cell becomes double alive. Energized, as it were. I know in my own experience, when I experienced the presence of God, it was so powerful. First, I thought my body would go to pieces. Then I thought I would start flying. And in fact, had to check to make sure my feet were still on the floor because it felt as if I was flying. He came away from that experience without any fear. Became fearless. He's still on the run. He's still in the wilderness. The king is still seeking his life. Things are still looking really, 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 really bad. And he has no fear. No anxiety. No fear. None of it. How is that? Well, if God is with you, and God is for you, and God has called you, and you've seen his power and his glory, what on earth could you be afraid of? What on earth could ever stand against you? What on earth could cause fear? Like even the fear of death is gone because you've seen the Lord in his power and glory. Like there's nothing in death to be afraid of once that's happened. And he became unshakable. Unshakable. You know what? We lived in shaking times. Yeah? It's painfully obvious to all of us now. It was it was pretty shaky all along, but now we really know how shaky it actually was. And it's not looking good. If you read the news, it's not looking good at all. Everything's shaking. In times like that, it's important that God's people should become unshakable. We should be the unshakable ones. The ones who are freed from fear and anxiety. Because we have given it all to the one who never changes and who never shakes and has all of history in his hands. Then there's nothing left to be afraid of. And you can become unshakable. And that's what happened to him. He's unshakable. He's so confident. Well, my enemies, they won't last. They won't last. They'll be gone. Because he's seen the Lord. He's been in his presence. That's made him unshakable. You know, we got enemies. In the 21st century, many centuries after this was written, we got enemies, or at least people who think they're enemies. Maybe some of the Russians imagine they're our enemies. Of course, those of us who've been following God, we know our greatest enemies are in our own hearts and minds. You know, those are our true enemies, the ones that are that inside, not the ones outside. And our battles, our mental battles and spiritual battles against the lies. There was the word about the lies, wasn't there? Did I hear? That was this service, right? Yeah, I'm already getting mixed up between where did they say what? But there was word about the lies. Like there's mental battles that we fight and lies that we. But if we'd seen the Lord, if we'd seen his power and his majesty, if we could only see his power and we'd be free. We would be free. That's why the Apostle Paul prays that his followers would be strengthened with the power of the Spirit so that they could take in the glory of God's love and power. That's what I pray for you today. You know, I've experienced the Lord's power and glory in ways I never imagined. It's changed everything. And I find myself in most services, and I'm in a different church most weekends. And I'm thinking, if they only knew. If they only knew. Like here you are, you're like worshiping the Lord, lifting him up, but if you only knew how great his glory and power really was. If you only knew how great his love for you was and how powerful and unrelenting and all-consuming it is, you would be unshakable. And David, lastly, came away from that experience fully satisfied, he says. Fully satisfied. It's the one thing that fully satisfies. The presence of God. That's what you're made for. That's what you're made for. You're made to be in his presence, and there we need nothing. Nothing can compare. What's water compared to the presence of God? What's position? What's wealth? Nothing. They're nothing. They're like shadows, imaginations, like not real. His presence, that's what's real. And that's why he says, your loving kindness is better than life. And he couldn't get enough. That's all he can think about. Once you've tasted of the presence of the Lord, you'll become an addict. One taste and you're addicted. Like you just can't ever think of anything else. You can't get anything else. That's all you want. And that's what he describes. He's like constantly wanting more. So good, so wonderful, so satisfying. So he says, I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you. I'm constantly thinking of you. I remember you in the middle of the night. I'm clinging to you. His desires have been completely taken and turned towards the presence of God because it is so sweet and so good. Once you've tasted, you're looking for it always. And you tend to find what you're looking for. Sometimes in the most unlikely places. About a month ago, my wife and I traveled 1,500 miles west to where my youngest son lived. He's got 3 daughters. I think they're 8, 10, and 12, granddaughters. Yeah, and if you're a grandparent, you do understand that grandchildren have a great power over their grandparents. Like, if it wasn't for the presence of the Lord, that would be the number 2 on the list of the things that you can only think about. And they have great power over their grandparents. And so we had to be there. And as it happened, those 3 daughters of his, those 3 granddaughters, spent this last year in this school where they learned singing and dancing. They're really into the singing and dancing thing. And so it was the end of term, or the end of thing recital. And so it's sort of a must appearance thing for all the relatives. So we went to this big auditorium. There's like 1,000 people there, just jammed with relatives. You know, the grandparents and the aunties and the uncles, and everybody's got to be there. Got to be there. And there's like 50, 60 different little dance groups that all have to do their routine. And most of them are, we're going along, we're going through one after another, and most of the songs are like the hip-hop songs. I hate hip-hop. Apologies to some of you who like it, but I don't really like it. I'm kind of one of those people that thought that music has gone downhill since the Beatles broke up. And so, it's just not my kind of music. And then some of it was Broadway musicals, and that's not as bad as hip hop, but it's still not really my love. But anyway, so we're just kind of going, and I'm really there, just like, where's my granddaughter? Just focus on the granddaughter. Where are they? Where's she standing? Going through the thing. All of a sudden, this number comes up. Next group, and I'm not really expecting anything. And suddenly, I felt the presence of God in the room. And it was like, I sat up and I started looking around like, what? What's happening? Something's happening. And then I heard this, more of the words of the song. They were dancing to this song, and the words of it were, I'm on my way to Salvation Mountain. I'm here to be changed. I'm here to be free. And I bet you felt the power of the Spirit just then when I said the words, right? Like, I was like on fire in an instant. It's like, he's here right now, like at the dance recital. And he's like moving up and down. I could sense him moving up and down the aisles. He's like moving up and down the aisles, looking for desperate people who want to be free. And I was like, all I could do to keep from jumping up and start yelling and saying, the Lord is here, the Lord's here, and you can be free right now. I just thought, they'll be taking me out the front, and my granddaughters will be embarrassed that you're a crazy old grandfather. But it gets a hold of you like that. Because it's just so wonderful. So wonderful. Last fall I was over here. I was at a young adult conference up in Nottingham that the Vineyard was putting on. We had like 1,000 young adults in their 20s mostly, people in their 20s. And one night in the middle of the meeting, all of a sudden the presence of God just came. And it was not in the worship. It was something else was going on. I forget what was happening. All of a sudden the presence of God came, and it was so heavy and so instant. Half the room went to their knees, like instantly. And it was so strong, I couldn't even speak. I couldn't even pray. It felt like the power of his presence was pressing so strong, you couldn't get breath out. Nobody moved and nobody said anything for half an hour, 30 minutes. We were there in silence, which in a room with 1,000 people is a really, really, really long time. And then finally it lifted just a little bit to where we could breathe. And we worshiped like never before for 3.5 hours, nonstop. Nobody left. People weren't even going out to the toilets. They were sort of like, God is here, and everything must stop. It was so powerful and overwhelming and so glorious. You know what, in our time, I think there's a lot of people who believe in Jesus, and they're trying their very best to live a godly life and do the right thing. And they're coming to church like we are here, and they're sitting and they're listening to the sermons. And if you probably ask them, do you love Jesus? They'd probably say, yeah. But really, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they're not thinking about Jesus that much. They're thinking about other things. Their lives are filled up with other desires. They're living in spiritual poverty because they don't know the one thing. They know about the one thing, but they don't know the one thing. It doesn't work to know about his presence. Like, you have to know it. You gotta experience it. And so they end up struggling. They struggle. Like, they're not free. They're not unshakable. They're struggling with anxiety. They're struggling with fear. They're struggling with, why am I not this? Why didn't I get that promotion? Why didn't I get that position? Why did my friend get promoted over me? And all that kind of stuff. That's what they're thinking about. If only they knew. If only they knew, they could join the ranks of the obsessed and the free. And they'd be longing and seeking and clinging to every bit of his presence that they could get. If only they knew, they'd be unshakable. Maybe that's some of us here this morning. And maybe you're saying right now, well, I'd like to know. I'd like to have that experience. How can I do that? How do I see God? And why don't we say, well, you can. That's why it's in the book. It's part of the promise. That's what this Holy Spirit business is all about. It's all about his presence. But we have to wait for it. We have to look for it. We have to be hungry for it. We got to be serious about it. Got to be in the sanctuary in the moments where he turns up. And you got to be hungry. Jesus said, "Blessed are the hungry, for they shall be filled." Who gets filled? The hungry. The biggest reason we're in spiritual poverty is because we're not desperate. Why aren't we desperate? Because we don't know. Our desires are misplaced. Turn your desires back to Jesus. Turn your desires back towards his presence. Start getting hungry. And maybe you too can be changed. You don't have to keep living like this. Get hungry, and you can become unshakable.
Thanks for joining us. For more information, visit woodsidechurch.com or follow us on social media.